In at number 10 is infamous Iron Man. Of all the things to happen to the character of Dr. Doom, becoming the new Iron Man was not at all what I expected. After the events of Secret Wars and reality being brought back to normal, Victor Von Doom was unsatisfied with his life. He decided to switch his morality and try to serve and help others instead of being a power-seeking villain all the time. Doomsy took on a bit of a mentor in Tony Stark, whom he had always respected, but when Tony Stark was put into a coma, Doom decided to take his place as the infamous Iron Man, which was a great reason to give us a Dr. Doom in a highly advanced suit of Iron Man's Model Prime Mark 51 armor. The armor was retrofitted into Doom's style, going from the red and gold to the gray, green, and light blue of Dr. Doom, and it's probably my favorite look ever for an Iron Man armor. But alongside the capabilities of the Iron Man armor, Doom was still able to access his magical abilities, so Iron Man with Doom's magic is basically what we have here. To make things even better, Doom's intellect and sorcery were near their peaks during this period in time, so he is truly an incredibly powerful hero. One of the ways Doom went about saving the world was using his knowledge of the criminal underworld, from when he was a criminal, to arrest a large gathering of villains in one big move. These villains were all gathered to figure out what they were gonna do now that Doom has switched sides, and then Doom just busts in through the roof and takes down heavy hitters such as the Wizard, the Wrecking Crew, the Hood, and Jigsaw all in one go. So cool. Number 9, Cassandra Cain Batgirl. If we want to really get into Batgirl designs that will knock your socks off, we don't have to look any farther than Cassandra Cain. Cassandra is the daughter of David Cain and Lady Shiva, two assassins who raised and trained Cassandra to become a perfect warrior. She became the new Batgirl in Batman No Man's Land, and her costume was such a drastic change compared to other Batgirls of the past. If I was walking in the streets of Gotham and I saw someone dressed like this, I would just move. Like to a different city altogether. I would be gone. Going from the almost friendly seeming outfits of Barbara Gordon's Batgirl costume to this dark and brooding costume with basically no human facial features, it's so fitting for her and her character. It's intimidating, it's intense, and if I was a Gotham City criminal who came face to face with this in the middle of the night, my life would flash before my eyes. Hey guys! I just want to say a big thank you for being such a great community. We appreciate the thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Make sure to let me know your favorite villain redesigns, and be sure to like and subscribe if you wanna. But moving on to number 8, it's Nightwing. Dick Grayson was the first ever sidekick to step out from under the shadow of his mentor and become his own genuine certified superhero. First appearing as Nightwing after leaving the Bat family in Tales of the Teen Titans Volume 1 number 44, his costume was honestly not too bad. Yes, it was goofy for sure, don't get me started on the collar, but with the gold wing design, it was honestly pretty cool. Now while the suit has had a large number of variations over the years, I'd be a fool if I didn't say that the blue V costume that debuted in 1996 isn't the best suit that character has ever worn. Ever since this came out, it's just stuck, with later suits just being variations of this classic look. His newest DC Rebirth suit is a close second, and it is basically just a slightly updated version of this one, which makes this the real turning point for Nightwing's costumes. The simple blue bird across the chest and into the arms mixed with the rest of the suit being black. Yes, it's a simpler look, but one that ultimately works better than any other one. Number 7, Chasm. Talking about Ben Reilly in terms of his costumes is basically just talking about more spider suits. That's always been a bit of an issue with his design and his character overall. He needs to separate himself from Spider-Man and Peter Parker to have his own identity, but the problem is he's a clone. His powers, face, and physique are essentially the same as Peter Parker. When Ben isn't actually standing in as Spider-Man himself, he is the Scarlet Spider, and that suit is awesome. No doubt in my mind, it's got spunk. But more recently, Ben Reilly has developed a little bit more as a character, and during a climactic fight with Spider-Man, Ben lets himself be submerged in a psychoreactive polymer and loses the fight. Later, he is recovered, but the polymer had mutated him. Now, he goes by the name Chasm, signifying the way he feels without his missing memories, and taking on a purple suit with black symbols and a light greenish blue accent slash gas things. The suit is almost almost reminiscent of a symbiote-style look, which are also Spider-Man-like, but it's wholly something of its own. The psychoreactive goo gave him an offensive spider sense and some slight energy manipulation abilities, displaying the capability to forge solid light weapons of his own energy. It's so cool. Number 6. Green Goblin. Green Goblin's most despicable act would have to be the passing of Gwen Stacy. It was shocking, and it caused Spider-Man to beat the heck out of him before Gobby was famously impaled by his own glider. Boom. Done. The end. Well, no. Little did anyone know that Norman Osborn was in fact alive and devising a master plan that he hoped would ruin Spider-Man forever. His goblin formula apparently gave him powerful regenerative abilities which allowed him to survive the impalement, and Norman fled to Europe. Osborn manipulated events from the shadows to have Peter Parker believe he was in fact a clone, and that Ben Reilly, who was a clone, was the original Peter Parker, eventually revealing himself and taking down Ben, who sacrificed himself to save Peter. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Riley's body disintegrated, proving that Peter Parker was in fact the real Peter Parker and Spider-Man all along, but by this point everyone had truly accepted that Green Goblin was just out of the picture. Number 5. Doc Ock. Another interesting take on the return of a villain. Doc Ock is near the end of his life, but you never really stop being a villain, so in an incredibly surprising twist, he figures out how to swap minds with Peter Parker. So now, Doc Ock has seemingly defeated his #1 foe and defeated death itself, as he now inhabits Peter Parker's body as the superior Spider-Man. Calling it a return is a bit of a play on words, as he never really leaves for a length of time, but he returns from his imminent demise as his #1 nemesis, and he even kind of outdoes Peter as a hero, if not of a bit of a brutal one. He eventually gives Peter back his body, and after inhabiting a few other bodies, he eventually returns back to his own after a deal with Mephisto. Number 4. Raquel. You may not even know who Raquel is. Well, she was the totally awesome Empress of the Skrull Empire. She took control of the Empire from her father's usurper. She was Empress of the Skrull Empire up until their homeworld's destruction at the hands of Galactus. After this, she was assumed to have perished with the planet back in 1983. Well, no. In 2020's Empire event, it's eventually revealed that Raquel found out about her son, Hulkling, and so she teleported away from the Skrull homeworld before its destruction. She then embedded herself deep in the Kree Empire as Tanalith, a Kree prisoner. She worked her way up the ranks of the Kree with the intention of merging both the Kree and the Skrull empires, but for her own motives. Number 3. Bullseye. The villain Bullseye is actually one of the more brutal villains from Marvel Comics, in my opinion. But this is seemingly proof of that fact. In Daredevil Volume 1, issue number 181 from 1981, that's a lot of ones, Bullseye has been hired by Kingpin only to find himself replaced by Elektra. In his anger, he uses his throwing cards and her own Psi to take her out of the picture permanently. Unfortunately for him, Elektra and Daredevil are very close, and Daredevil is not a fan of this. After a heated battle high on the rooftops, Daredevil lets Bullseye fall to what most thought was his demise. It was honestly really shocking for fans of the hero, but it turns out that instead Bullseye had indeed survived his fall, but was now paralyzed with a broken spine. It wasn't until Deadpool Volume 3 number 34 from 1999 that he gets his bones laced with adamantium by Lord Darkwind, allowing the villain to finally recover and go back to his mercenary duties. Number 2. Kraven the Hunter. In Kraven's Last Hunt, Kraven the Hunter tracked down Spider-Man, beat him up pretty badly, buried him alive, wore his costume, ate some spiders, and then took his own life. Was it messed up? Absolutely it was, but it was also possibly the best comic he'd ever been in until that point, and a big going out moment for the villain. He even got replacements with other members of his family going on to fight Spider-Man. He was gone, done, out of the picture, but then out of nowhere came the Grim Hunt, where that same family, who stepped in to successfully replace him, found a way to revive him using Kane Parker's body, who they thought was Peter Parker. I think it was unexpected because it was just kind of unnecessary and a little convoluted, but the Grim Hunt was cool, so I wasn't really complaining. And in at number 1, the leader and Abomination. Okay, I'm gonna get like a little meta here, and also I got 2 for 1 in this one, so combo for you guys. The MCU MCU's Incredible Hulk movie has always kind of been a bit of a black sheep. Obviously, Bruce Banner morphed into looking like Mark Ruffalo after previously looking a lot like Edward Norton, but a large majority of the characters, except for Everett Ross, just kind of disappeared from any later MCU stories. But now, thanks to Shang-Chi and the She-Hulk show, we got back Emil Blonsky, aka Abomination, played by Tim Roth. And in the new Captain America movie that is going to be coming out soon, we will also be getting back Samuel Stearns, who started to become the leader at the end of the Hulk movie, and was played by Tim Blake Nelson. Now, what I really want to know is if we are going to get back Ty Burrell playing Doc Samson, because I would love to see him with the green hair.
Coming in at number 10, we've got the Blue Beetle. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. That's what they always say, right? Well, that's what happened here. An enemy got in real close. Too close, in fact, seeing as his proximity allowed him to absolutely dome the Blue Beetle. Let me explain. Back before Infinite Crisis, Maxwell Lord wasn't seen as a villain. In fact, this would-be baddie was a friend to the Justice League, or so they thought. Because as soon as he had the opportunity, Mr. Lord pulled out his gun and blew the Blue Beetle away. Poor Ted Kord didn't even see it coming. And neither did anyone reading. This kind of betrayal was totally out of the blue and threw a lot of fans way off. At the time this came out, it was an insanely unpredictable move, especially as the Blue Beetle was wasted right in front of his best friend. Maxwell Lord would go on to cause plenty more trouble for the Justice League, but it's hard to imagine acts worse than gaining the trust of a superhero and all of his fans, only to absolutely annihilate him when his guard was down. Coming in number 9, we've got Rorschach. Watchmen is such a rich tome, full of all sorts of overlapping storylines and fascinating characters. A fan favorite has to be the Inkblot Man himself, eater of cold beans and thrower of hot oil, Rorschach. It's funny that this character, styled after the perception testing psychological assessment, can be interpreted by different people in different ways. Sure, Moore may have created him as a way to showcase the flaws in other similar superheroes, but a lot of folks saw the brooding, ultra-violent detective as a symbol of edgy justice. There's a lot of depth to Rorschach, which is compounded upon throughout the graphic novel as he skulks in the darkness attempting to solve a puzzle that isn't meant to be solved. We learn of his traumatic childhood and of his deep insecurities and complexes, and his pathological need to beat the ever-living daylights out of anyone who may stand in his way. However, after all of this, poor Rorschach goes out with a simultaneous bang and whimper. In a world full of vigilantes limited by their own human bodies and heroes bankrolled by higher powers, running into a true superhuman is something else. So when Rorschach, after all of his night-crawling antics, runs into Dr. Manhattan, he's unable to really do anything. He's no longer in his city, and his rage at the world around him is unbridled. Unable to compromise his morals, Rorschach would have threatened the peace Ozymandias and Manhattan worked towards if he was allowed to live. So Dr. Manhattan just blows him up. On first read, it really is surprising. It seems like it happens out of the blue. But going back and considering all that was happening, it sort of makes sense. Still though, who expects the character they've followed through greasy back alleys and horrific prisons to suddenly burst like a balloon? Coming in at number 8, we've got Wolverine. Damn, who would have thought that the adamantium-boned super freak could die, right? He essentially doesn't age and can heal from pretty much any wound, so how does one kill Wolverine? Well, it went down in a pretty fitting fashion, that's for sure. You can understand that old Logan would be pretty tired after all his years of heroism and hurt, so when his healing factor finally crapped out, it was time for a long rest. However, he wasn't going down alone. Deciding he would prevent any other Wolverines from coming into existence, and in doing so hopefully stop anyone from feeling pain as he has, he sought out Dr. Abraham Cornelius, the man who performed the life-altering experiments on him. The fight was intense and resulted in Wolverine being covered in liquid adamantium. Fitting, right? The stuff that's helped keep him alive from the inside all these years, now totally surrounding and suffocating him. He went down doing what was important to him though, which is also fitting. I suppose a lot of people did see this coming, considering the run was known as the death of Wolverine, but comics have teased the death of major heroes in the past and then found ways around that sort of permanency. It's just wild to see a character who couldn't die if they tried finally take the big sleep. Coming in number 7, we've got Alfred Pennyworth. Not Alfred. The beloved butler to Bruce/Batman, brutally brought down by an evil edition of Papa Wayne. For what reason, you may ask? Well, this alternate version of Thomas Wayne wanted to teach Bruce a lesson. He found his way into the main DC universe with the intent to show Bruce how much pain and suffering being a hero would cause. So he killed Alfred and nothing was ever the same. Taking out such a long-standing and integral supporting character is an enormous thing to do, and it all happened so quickly. One day, Alfred was here, the next, he was gone. This caused plenty of cascading changes too, from negatively affecting the mental state of all those who cherished Alfred to the increased reliance on Lucius Fox.
Number 6. Uranos. The Eternal known as Uranos first ever appeared in Marvel What If number 24 in September of 1980, in a story that explained the origins of the Eternals. Now in this story, Uranos is trying to convince his brother Kronos that the Eternals should use their massive amounts of power to take over the world. He believed the Eternals would best fulfill their duties if they exterminated both the deviants and humans on Earth, all life outside the universe, and then imprison the Celestials, but his brothers Kronos and Oceanus disagreed, sparking the Eternal Civil War. The war culminated in his defeat and banishment to the planet Uranus. Surprise though, this isn't actually what happened. The Uranos, who was banished to another planet, was actually a clone, and the real Uranos was banished to the Exclusion, which is where Thanos and Druig go in the recent Eternals The Heretic story from 2021. Here we are introduced to a very different looking Uranos who becomes the weapon of Druig against the mutant population in the Judgment Day event. Number 5. Magneto. Speaking of the Judgment Day event, in the X-Men Red comics, the story actually featured a whole Magneto comeback all of its own, which was incredibly awesome, and I think it deserves a mention. Magneto isn't really a full-on villain anymore. He has an incredibly complex moral compass, which makes him more like an anti-hero than anything else. He's a fan favorite, which is why it was incredibly hard to watch him get his heart completely ripped out of his chest by Uranos during Judgment. After Uranos had completely decimated the population living on Mars though, Magneto reveals that he is actually still alive, using his powers to control the iron in his own blood to keep his blood flowing. He used his power to carry on surviving without a heart. It's completely insane and totally awesome. Number 4. Dr. Doom. In 2009's Fantastic Four number 566, Dr. Doom reveals that he had actually learned everything he knows from one incredibly powerful reality warping villain called the Marquis of Death. Doom also dropped the little tidbit that the Marquis would be showing up. Only when the Marquis did show up with his new apprentice, he was less than happy with the progress Doom had made on Earth, and he attacked. The Marquis warped reality, made Doom think he had won, then snatched the victory away, set him on fire, turned his heart to stone and his blood to acid, then sent him back in time to the Pliocene age to be eaten by megalodons. The Marquis goes on to fight the Fantastic Four, almost beating them, and then, when the Marquis is on his last legs, his apprentice shows up and straight up slaps and destroys him, but not before revealing that he is actually Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom survived being eaten by a megalodon, gained enough power and dark magic to completely change his form, he became the Marquis' apprentice again, and even defeated Uatu the Watcher so he wouldn't be discovered. All of that to get his revenge and finally defeat the Marquis of Death. Number 3. Vulcan. We're going back to the X-Men Red story yet again. I'd say I'm sorry, but I kinda love this story, so I'm not. How everything happens is still being somewhat explained, but what we do know is that Vulcan is being used as a pawn on a chessboard by Abigail Brand, the director of S.W.O.R.D., which is like S.H.I.E.L.D. but in space. So basically, on the planet Mars is a mutant population called the Iraqi, and they are pretty combat focused. They decide who makes up their governing council with trial by combat. Well, when Vulcan made a play to make it onto that council in issue 3, he was very much defeated. Like, it seemed like he passed away. But it turns out that Abigail Brand either resurrected him through the mutant resurrection protocol or helped heal him, as in issue number 9 of the comic, he shows up out of nowhere again and is essentially challenging the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire, believing himself to still be their emperor like he was all those years back. Number 2. Starro. Sometimes when villains return, they don't always go back to their villainy, and they don't always come back in the way you might expect. The intergalactic conqueror known as Starro has been an enemy of the Justice League for years. He has given them a run for their money many times, and since he's been around so long, he has danced around with his morality. Well, Starro was eventually defeated and he pretty much perished. Sort of. Batman seems to have taken a part of this giant starfish and put it under his care to assist him and the Justice League with its incredible psychic capabilities. This new creation is called Jarro, and he is awesome. Starro himself isn't actually completely gone, as we find out a bit later, but Jarro just wants to make his dad, aka Batman, proud. He even dresses up as a Robin to try to be the best Robin ever. It's fantastic. And in at number 1, Sinestro. Sinestro is Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps' greatest enemy. He was imprisoned in the Central Battery on Oa during the events of Emerald Twilight, where Hal Jordan went completely bonkers. In a last-ditch effort to defeat him, the Guardians released Sinestro in an attempt to stop Hal Jordan from destroying the Corps, and their battle was brutal. It eventually came down to a bare-knuckle fistfight, and Sinestro drove Jordan to go over the edge and snap Sinestro's neck, taking him down permanently. But this is a list of returns. So, in a later retcon, it was revealed that the Sinestro that Jordan snapped was really a light construct, and that Sinestro and the Parallax entity were actually the ones responsible for Hal Jordan's descent into villainy. So now, all the Hal Jordan fans can rest assured their hero is still squeaky clean. And honestly, a really cool return for a really awesome villain. Alright, number 10, Anti-Monitor. During the events of Forever Evil, the crime syndicate of America of Earth 3 invades the Prime DC universe, escaping the threat of their complete destruction back on their homeworld. For almost the entire comic event, the CSA all allude to the threat that destroyed their home and just how terrifying it is. The threat itself even makes a cut in the universal barriers, just trying to make its way into the Prime universe. After the CSA have been defeated in an awesome fight with Earth's villains, Superman speaks about how the threat they spoke of has to be Darkseid, and he begins preparing for Darkseid's return. But for us readers, we get to learn that the true enemy the CSA were running from was actually the incredibly powerful Anti-Monitor, who had destroyed almost all of Earth 3's reality. It's a cool reveal that leads straight into Darkseid War. Number 9, Ultron. Ultron is a villain that really just pops up over and over as he constantly reinvents himself in different ways. Now, one of his biggest reinventions was when he created an Age of Ultron, which became the name of the 2013 crossover series. Here, he finally achieved his goal of taking over the world. He created machines to hunt down anyone who failed to submit to his rule, with only a small group of heroes surviving and trying to oppose the mad Ultron. He was finally brought down by a program planted in his design by his creator, Hank Pym, after a time-traveling Sue Storm and Wolverine warned Pym of the future threat Ultron would pose. There is also his whole character arc in the MCU's What If animated series as well, which was honestly really cool to watch, and I did not expect it to go the way it went. Number 8, Armless Tiger Man. You may be wondering who the heck Armless Tiger Man even is, and you know what? That's fair. Honestly, his return is not the only thing we never saw coming, because his creation was something I never saw coming. But here we are with a German amputee with pointy ears, sharpened teeth, and enough leg strength to bend steel. He had an incredibly brief career during World War II and was eventually taken out in Wakanda by one of the Howling Commandos. But what was really surprising was when he reappeared in Incredible Hercules number 129 to 131 in 2009. He was among a group of individuals that were the Greek god Pluto's jury of the undead, and they together put Zeus on trial and subdued Herc himself. If you guys are enjoying this video, or you like this channel, make sure you drop a like to let us know that you like what we're giving you. And in number 7 is Superboy Prime. During the massive Dark Knights Metal event, the Trinity of Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman go to a collection of 3 dark multiverse worlds that each have the 3 main crises from DC Comics happening on repeat. Only each of these worlds' crises are happening differently than they were supposed to. Wonder Woman ended up in the world where the Infinite Crisis is constantly on repeat. Only in this world, the heroes lost and Wonder Woman is met by Superboy Prime, who hasn't shown up in the DC universe for quite some time now. Now, he isn't entirely a villain, like he definitely has been, but he has always wanted the best outcome, but usually in the worst ways possible. But now, in this death metal event, he fights toe-to-toe against the Batman Who Laughs and seemingly destroys him. Or does he? Number 6, the Man Without Fear. Daredevil is a hero who has gone through a few distinctive looks. Arguably, his most iconic was when he went from the yellow and red motif to just a straight up red devil. It was just right. But After being possessed by a demonic entity, Matt Murdock, Daredevil, needed time to recover and rediscover himself away from his home, and he left the defense of Hell's Kitchen to someone you might not expect, T'Challa. After being ambushed by Dr. Doom, who put T'Challa in a coma, another had to take up the role of Black Panther. T'Challa lost his enhanced abilities, and after the events of Doom War, he rendered all of Wakanda's vibranium inert. So, no powers, no vibranium, and no longer the ruler of Wakanda. How about a vacation to Hell's Kitchen? Enter the Black Panther Man Without Fear story. As the now depowered street-level defender of Hell's Kitchen, T'Challa had to rely on the basics such as his body armor, homemade gadgets, and his fighting ability. This suit doesn't really display its own usefulness, like previous Black Panther suits that had a whole host of technological upgrades. Instead, the suit displays the usefulness and ingenuity of T'Challa himself, while also looking both appropriately street-level, yet inspired by T'Challa's Wakandan royal background. Number 5. Superior Spider-Man. Similar to the way Dr. Doom became Iron Man, when Doc Ock took over the body of Peter Parker in the Superior Spider-Man story arc, he was not against a little redesign, and man was it fantastic. The changes made to the suit are somehow both subtle, yet obvious. The classic blue section of the suit was changed to black, the symbols on the suit were redesigned, and Octavius added retractable talons to the hands and feet to use in combat. And both the biggest and again most subtle change came in the eyes of the suit that changed shape ever so slightly to look a bit more like goggles, alluding to the goggles that Doc Ock wears. Speaking of alluding to the villain's look, eventually mechanical arms were added to the suit as well that were so much more helpful in combat. Spider Octopus gave an edge to the regular spider suit that just works so well for this era of the character, but it also added some significant upgrades. Carbonadium plating, enhanced lenses, upgraded wrist web shooters, web wings, nerve hacking tech, and frickin' lasers. What? Number 4. The black suit. Spider-Man is showing up twice on this list, and it's for a very good reason. Spider-Man's red and blue classic suit is extremely iconic, and I don't think anyone thinks it's bad. The Sam Raimi version of that suit is beautiful. But the black spider suit that appeared in Secret Wars? Oh baby, that suit was something else. If you tell me that you don't like this one, you're a liar, and 2, we can't be friends. Sorry. This suit was actually designed by a guy called Randy Schuler for a contest Marvel had, and they paid him $220 for it. $220 for one of the most fan-beloved Spider-Man suits. $220 for what eventually would become one of Spider-Man's greatest villains and eventually one of Marvel's most popular anti-heroes. This is the best investment Marvel has ever made. The black symbiote suit was so great and so popular that Marvel even came up with excuses for Peter to get a regular cloth version of the suit made by his girlfriend Black Cat. That wasn't a brain-consuming symbiote and just had the benefit of stealth, intimidation, and looking sexy. Damn. Number 3. Catwoman. The history of Catwoman's look is a long and honestly incredibly odd story. In the beginning, Selena Kyle was just a woman in a green dress that was also a thief. She eventually donned an orange costume with a cape, and eventually she added a terrifying full cat face mask in the 1940s Batman number 3. Now over time she would go through a number of looks with a purple gown, which eventually became a bodysuit, and eventually a black bodysuit that connected to her cat-shaped mask. And we can never forget the leather Tim Burton Catwoman costume. That was mwah. But speaking to her character and the actual occupation she has as a thief, no design matched up to the suit created by Darwin Cook, created for the character after the end of her first ongoing series. A leather suit which had a more practical vibe was matched with a pair of cat eyes goggles, and it became what is arguably the character's most popular costume, with later redesigns all primarily retaining the key elements of this suit. Number 2. Wolverine's cowl. How could we see it coming? It was one of the first redesigns for the character, and it was so iconic that he hasn't really deviated from the look ever since. When Wolverine was introduced as the Canadian superhero, his design philosophy was to just make him look like an animal. So yeah, the whiskers and pointed ears really helped to emulate that. But once he became one of the key players in the giant-sized X-Men in 1975, a redesign was needed. Almost everything about his look stayed the same, except that now his cowl contained no whiskers, thank God, and his pointed ears became quite a bit larger. The change was so simple yet so necessary, and so iconic that it hasn't really changed since. And this was his first ever redesign. Number 1. Nipple suit. Batman Batman relies heavily on his tech. His Batsuit is probably the most important of that tech. It's highly advanced in terms of supersuits, and it's constantly being improved and added to. Sometimes it gets a tech overhaul to battle a villain, like a zebra suit. Sometimes it will get a redesign to better personify where he is in his life, like the Zur-En-Arrh Batsuit. But of all the suits donned by Bruce Wayne, one stands above the rest, and all it took was the addition of a pair of anatomic nipples. In both Batman Forever from 1995 and Batman and Robin from 1997, the director Joel Schumacher decided that he wanted his heroes to emulate human perfection, and so he was inspired by statues of Greek gods and heroes. This is why both of his Batsuits worn by Val Kilmer and George Clooney have a shiny, muscle-adorned physique and, of course, nipples. It's really a very small detail, and if it wasn't for a close-up shot of just the chest and its extremely prevalent nipples, I might not have even noticed. But when you realize those nipples are there, you realize that no other superhero has nipples built into their costume. Iconic.
In at number 10, Shazam and Stargirl. A lot of the superheroes close to Shazam don't know that he's actually a teenager trapped in an adult's body. While working with the JSA, he and the teen Stargirl started getting, a little bit closer, and while the two were stuck in a different dimension, their powers were stripped away, so the adult Shazam was in his teen form of Billy Batson. Other than in this scenario, these two superheroes hooking up was just plain weird, which is also why we would have never seen this coming regardless of how close they were before this. They worked collaboratively to escape this dimension and even sealed it with a kiss. Although once returning to the JSA, they were kinda really weirded out by seeing an adult Shazam hitting on the teen Stargirl, so definitely a short-lived hookup. In at number 9, Black Widow and Winter Soldier. After many had thought that Bucky Barnes was dead for sure, he made a miraculous comeback as the Winter Soldier in 2005. Bucky had spent his time away working with the Soviet Union as their top assassin, and during that time he had begun a relationship with Natasha Romanoff. Although because they were both part of a secret Soviet organizations, their brains were constantly being messed with, which led to the Winter Widow couple forgetting that they had even been together. When Bucky had his brief stint as Captain America, he and Natasha worked hand in hand on a lot of missions, but the Black Widow was brainwashed yet again to be an assassin. Bucky, on the other hand, was able to break out of this mind control and remember their relationship, but Natasha remembered everything except their hookups. Oof. Oh, sorry, I don't remember. In at number 8, Hawkeye and Wasp. In another surprising hookup that we never saw coming, we have the odd pairing of Hawkeye and the Wasp. Written by the sort of hated Chuck Austin, when he was working on the Avengers comic books, he drove fans insane with the way that he took the characters out of context. He would often write in storylines for characters that just didn't fit them. Fans couldn't believe how out of left field this relationship was between the two friends who literally had no build up to this really random hookup. Even Captain America and Hank were questioning why the pair were embracing each other at the start of Avengers issue 83 volume 3. Thankfully this didn't last long because Chuck was, well, removed from his job, as was the hookup. In at number 7, Cyclops and Emma Frost. This hookup isn't so much something that we didn't see coming, but more so something that fans really wanted to ignore ever happened. Emma's character may have been altered a bit, but deep down she's still this manipulative and arrogant lady. She only started hooking up with Cyclops because she knew it would make Jean Grey angry, and you wouldn't like her when she's angry. The White Queen did everything in her power to play games with Scott, eventually driving his character into a very bad place before she eventually embraced her role as a villain, where she should always remain.
Number 6, Green Arrow. Remember that time Oliver Queen died because he didn't want to sacrifice his arm to live? Yep. Also, why did he even have to stick his arm in this bomb in the first place? Seems like a bad move. I don't know why he really chose to do that. It's a little unclear to me in that comic. In Green Arrow issues 99 to 101, we are taken on this roller coaster of an illogical ride that ultimately ends in Ollie's death. He has his hand in a Russian bomb, and rather than let Superman deal with it any other way, he chooses to die. I don't think anyone would have expected that choice from Green Arrow, and yet one of the best strategies they came up with, well, more Superman came up with, because at this point Ollie's pretty much ready to give up it seems, is to remove Oliver's arm and fly him to safety. And then I guess return to secure the bomb before it explodes, with Green Arrow's arm still keeping the dead man switch safely in place. Assuming that would work. It isn't that Ollie wants to risk that this plan might not work though, he just doesn't want to sacrifice his arm in order to live. And so he dies. I guess if you shoot arrows with your arm, you're like, how will I live without shooting arrows? There's a lot of other things you could do, Oliver. Number 5. Blue Beetle. Blue Beetle was one of the most shocking deaths because of who was pulling the trigger. At this point, we might now see Maxwell Lord as a dangerous and more villainous figure not to be messed with, but at the time, he was believed to be an ally of the Justice League, not someone who would betray them. So this death caught many off guard. What had happened was that Blue Beetle discovered that Lord had been against them the whole time and was using his position to gather intel on superheroes and basically destroy the Justice League International from the inside out. Maxwell still seemed to see Blue Beetle as a friend though, as he did offer him the chance to join him and protect the world against the superhuman threat. But Ted Kord refused and as such was killed by Lord. Number 4. Silver St. Cloud. This death was very shocking at the time, although to be fair, we should know that if it seems like Batman is about to get a happily ever after moment, it's too good to be true. And something is likely about to go sideways. Such was the case with Silver St. Cloud. Silver was a Gotham socialite who dated Bruce Wayne way back in the 70s in the comics, but the two ended up splitting when she learned that Bruce Wayne was actually Batman. Silver couldn't stand the thought of losing Bruce and of him constantly being in danger. Years later, however, she would walk back into Bruce's life and end up back in his arms once more, ready to accept and come to understand and respect his responsibilities as Batman. Bruce even considered hanging up his cowl and retiring from the vigilante life for Silver so that they could start a life all their own together. Unfortunately, just as this seemed like it would be a reality, Batman's new partner, Baphomet, was revealed to be villain Automatopoeia, tragically killing Silver instantly with a slit while Bruce's back was turned. Just, Batman, if you're ever gonna be happy, don't trust it. Number 3. Batman. This one is pretty recent, so if you don't want some recent going-ons of the comics to be spoiled, you might want to skip this point. Alright, now that you've been warned, let's continue on. Recently in death metal, our heroes have discovered the Perpetua is planning to harness the energy of 3 major DC crises by building them again and making them recur. As such, Wonder Woman, Superman, and Batman each set out 2 separate ones with the hopes of saving those lives endangered by this plot. Black Lantern Batman is tasked with handling Crisis on Infinite Earths, but realizes shortly after arriving that he's already too late. He finds himself coming undone, dissolving into antimatter. It's a brutal page, but what's more unexpected is a few pages later when all our heroes are all back to normal and together again. What? Number 2. Poison Ivy. Ivy's death in Heroes in Crisis literally came out of nowhere, and if no one saw it coming, it's just because of how fast it happened. Huh, pun intended. Ivy was one of the few killed in the Sanctuary Massacre, accidentally killed by hero Wally West when he lost control. Fortunately, Wally was able to bring Ivy back using a rose she'd given to Harley Quinn in order to, in essence, regrow her. She came back with a whole new look as well. However, even though her death ended up being temporary, it was still pretty shocking and unexpected, considering how popular Poison Ivy has been throughout comics as both a villain and an anti-hero. Number 1. Alex DeWitt. If you read comics of any kind, you'll likely know who Alex DeWitt is. Her name has become almost synonymous with the comic book term fridging, coined by writer Gail Simone. The term even has its own website, which Simone made in 1999 for the sole purpose of documenting various other times women in comics were fridged. In other words, female characters being sacrificed, depowered, or assaulted for the advancement of a male character's plot. Alexandra DeWitt, known for being Kyle Rayner's girlfriend, was one of the most shocking deaths of this kind that helped to basically highlight the way female characters were often used and treated in comics. Alex was killed by Major Force, a villain who strangled her and then stuffed her in the fridge, leaving her for Kyle to find upon his return. Unexpected for many. Number 10. Black Mask. Black Mask was killed by Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. She shot Black Mask point blank, killing him as revenge for what he'd done to those she loved and cared for, chiefly burning down a building in Selina's hood on the east side, which she was trying to help and was kinda under protection, and for hurting her sister Maggie in an irreparable way and basically driving her insane. However, surprisingly, this would not be the end of Black Mask. Black Mask would return as a Black Lantern during the Blackest Night event and would eventually even return to life, surprising many folks, Selina included. But I mean, Black Mask is so great. How can you just let that villain go? You can't, unless it's Birds of Prey, and then he's probably gone forever in the DCEU. Number 9. Mr. Sinister. One of the weirdest comebacks was when Mr. Sinister created a failsafe in the case of his death, which did inevitably happen. Sinister basically intended to come back via the mutant youth he had once experimented on, who are now all grown up. When this failed, he planned a backup for that backup. Claudine Ranko became Miss Sinister, but But as startling as that transformation was, we were even more startled when Mr. Sinister suddenly returned through her, basically bursting out of her Miss Sinister form, overriding even his Miss Sinister, part Claudine, part Sinister self, and coming back entirely, at least for a few pages, until he could find a more permanent solution later on, when he would fully return via a clone. Also, he literally burst out of Miss Sinister, like literally was like, pop, here I am! It was weird and creepy and definitely super memorable. I know I found it shocking. I don't know if you found it shocking, but I did. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving our channel here on Top 10 Nerd, please go check us out over on Facebook, where we also have cool stuff, and we're also going to be having some exclusive things coming your way. In fact, at the time that this goes up, I think there will already be something super exclusive over there. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are following us there as well. Number 8. Kite Man. Kite Man is often relegated to the C-list villains in the DC universe. He's often considered one of Batman's lamest villains, and yet via the Harley Quinn animated series, he saw a revitalization of his character, with him even getting a solid fan base due to how he was depicted in the show. I love when things like this happen to C-listers like Kite Man or Polka Dot Man, a lot of mans out there, or even characters like Peacemaker. Not a man, just well, he is a man, but isn't a man at the end of his name. All of these characters are lesser known and even less appreciated usually, but honestly, they all deserve to be hyped for certain reasons. I love characters that are C-listers, in case you didn't know. Kite Man, while an all-around good guy in the animated series, is still considered to be a villain in that animated universe, albeit still a C-list one. And yet this is what makes us love him so much. The fact that he is working hard to try and make a name for himself is kind of a huge part of why I think people just love him. That and the fact that he seems fairly comfortable with who he is, even though he isn't necessarily a top tier villain. And you know, he does know it. It doesn't mean that he doesn't try, and it doesn't mean that he is ashamed of who he is or his, you know, his kite gimmick. He rocks it. Hell yeah, Kite Man. Hell yeah. Number 7. Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is a staple villain when it comes to the Avengers team, but even still, he's not the first villain I think of when it comes to threats the Avengers might face in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's kind of a weird villain, and he's got a floating chair. It's weird. This is all part of the reason why I was surprised to hear that he was getting a revival, sort of, via the MCU, where he'd appear as a villain in Quantumania. Although even from that point on, I was one of the people speculating that his role in the MCU might be larger than just the Ant-Man and the Wasp film he was slated to star in. Especially when we heard that Jonathan Majors was going to be playing him, I was like, okay. You don't just do that and then make it like a one movie like blip of a villain. And so far it would seem to many others' surprise, I and some others may have been right when it came to our speculation on Kang's role. An alternate version of Kang appeared in Loki known as He Who Remains. This version of Kang warned of many different versions of himself that were basically being held back due to his maintenance and pruning of the sacred timeline. He also warned that killing him would actually cause the timeline to splinter, allowing all these Kangs to have free roam of the multiverse, where many of them were not as chill as he was. And yeah, I don't think they're gonna be as chill. Kang the Conqueror, here we go.
Coming in at number 6, we have who actually created Batman. If you go back through Batman's history, you usually find that a lot of people always say Bob Kane was the person who made Batman, that it was all his idea and he was the only dude who came up with all the amazing features that we know and love as the Dark Knight. Well, that's actually not true at all. Bob was the artist who created the look of Batman, which is arguably the least important part of the character. Yeah, he did make the dude look super cool, but Bill Finger was the mind behind making most of the important pieces of Batman, like the Batmobile, the different gadgets, Robin, and even the Joker. And who would Batman be without the Joker? And the writer is technically the one who came up with the idea of the character, not to discredit the artist, but we understand the difference. Well, why is it that everyone remembers Bob Kane as the guy who created Batman? Well, because he forced the people at DC to sign a contract that said he was the sole creator of Batman. So going back to the history, it's revealed that this dude was kind of a d***. Coming at number 5, we have Jason Todd's death. If something like this happened today, it would for sure play out the same way because we know how the internet works, but I love this story because it just goes to show you how trolls have existed forever. When Jason Todd was brought into the fray as the new Robin, there came a time where he was kidnapped by the Joker and DC Comics brought it to the fans to determine his fate. They would ask the public to vote on whether or not this child would die, and the fans voted yes. Wait, what? Yeah, dude, this is what happened. When you ask the public their opinion on something that doesn't really matter, they usually choose something like this. Like when that research vessel got named Bodie McBoatface. Well, I think the shocking part is that DC stuck true to the fans' vote and they killed off Jason Todd, who would later come back as the much cooler Red Hood. Coming in at number 4, we have Joker wears his own face. You have to give it up to the writers over at DC. The Joker has been in their stable of characters since the beginning, and they find ways to keep making him crazier. Like the time he had the doll maker cut off his own face and then he vanished for a year. Then he would re-emerge by breaking into Gotham PD and stealing his face back and hooking it back on with some staples, clips, and bungee cords. Talk about making an entrance. You disappear for over a year, then you come back to Gotham, kill a bunch of cops, and staple your own face back on. Bravo. Coming in at number 3, we have Sue Dibney and Dr. Light. Comics will stretch into graphic content quite often when it comes to combat and death, but there have been a few occasions where they've taken dark storylines even further. There was the case of Elongated Man's wife Sue Dibney and her encounter with Dr. Light. No one remembered this because their minds had been erased through the means of magic, but eventually it all came to the surface that Dr. Light had violated Elongated Man's wife, Sue Dibney. The reason that everyone finds out about this is because Sue Dibney was actually murdered, and the investigation of her murder is what revealed all these horrible acts. Coming in at number 2, we have Rorschach Goes Boom. The Watchmen still stands as one of the greatest comic book stories ever told. The social commentary on the Cold War timeline that is completely changed by the fact that an all-knowing super being is living in America and you have a mystery that keeps everyone's head spinning until the last minute. Well, this all builds up when eventually the truth is out that Ozymandias orchestrated an attack on American soil to kill thousands of people and made it look like it was Dr. Manhattan. This way the human race would have a common enemy, and this would prevent nuclear war between America and the Soviets. The idea behind this is killing thousands would save billions. Well, Rorschach is one of the only characters in the book that has a solid moral compass, and he refuses to let the unjust go unpunished and sets out to tell the truth. But Dr. Manhattan sides with Ozymandias, seeing his plan as salvation, and in order to keep it in motion, he obliterates Rorschach into little pieces. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have Barbara Gordon getting shot. To this day, this is one of the most controversial moments in comics. You have Barbara Gordon just chilling in her house. There's a knock at the door. She's like, oh, who could that be? She answers the door, and before she can say, why is the Joker dressed like Jason Segel and forgetting Sarah Marshall, she's getting shot. The bullet would go into her spine, putting her in a wheelchair because she lost the use of her legs and could no longer go out into the field as Batgirl. This created an interesting new element to her character when she became the Oracle, but her getting shot wasn't even the most graphic part of this encounter with the Clown Prince of Crime. He then assaults Barbara, takes explicit photos of her, and puts them into a horrifying funhouse which he subjects her father to try and make him go insane. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that that was extremely shocking and none of us saw that coming.
Alright, coming in at number 10, Mar-Vell. Let's start part 2 off a little differently with a hero who returns as a villain. Mar-Vell of the Kree was Marvel Comics' original Captain Marvel, and he was also the first Marvel superhero to permanently pass away when he succumbed to cancer in 1982's The Death of Captain Marvel. The character has reappeared in visions or in flashbacks, and obviously in alternate realities. One of my actual favorites of that is Mar-Vell of the Cancerverse. It's just a really cool and creative idea. Basically, on his famous deathbed, the Many-Angled Ones contacted and corrupted the dying Mar-Vell, granting him new powers which he used to transmute the other heroes, and with Mar-Vell as their lord, they took down the Avatar of Death, which in turn completely destroyed Death itself, allowing the Many-Angled Ones to invade their reality. Number 9. Jor-El. Good guys coming back as bad guys is fun, but some of you may not have liked this one. Jor-El and his wife Lara are extremely famous for shooting their son Kal-El into space using the last remaining prototype spaceship and allowing themselves to succumb to the destruction of their home planet, Krypton. Kal-El landed on Earth, grew up as Clark Kent, and became Superman. Well, in Superman Volume 3, number 32, we are introduced to a villain known as Mr. Oz. And just to ruin the whole point of Jor-El's sacrifice and kind of the whole mythos of Superman, it turns out that Mr. Oz is Jor-El. As Krypton was crumbling away, Jor-El was whisked away by a mysterious force. Who was Dr. Manhattan? Shh, don't tell. He was brought to Earth where he crashed in a war-torn nation where Jor-El was forced to witness the atrocities of man. Jor-El adopted the moniker of Mr. Oz and began manipulating certain events from behind the scenes to try and, I don't know really, make humanity good, I guess? The surprising reveal was not expected, but it wasn't really welcome either. Number 8. The Red Skull. Okay, so there are a few times the Red Skull has reappeared over his comic book life. Actually, there's a lot. But I want to move over to the MCU for this one, because when he just happened to be a floating wraith-like being chilling on Vormir in Infinity War, I actually verbally went, what? So, at the end of Captain America, the First Avenger, the Red Skull puts his evil hands on the Tesseract, and it opened up this big old window into space. And the Red Skull started like being ripped all apart to pieces and then shot through that window looking thing. So it turns out that that was actually a wormhole, and he was pulled through it and landed on Vormir, where he became stuck in a state of limbo, and he had no choice but to serve as the Soul Stone Stonekeeper. After Thanos gave up Gamora to gain the stone, Red Skull became free to do whatever he wanted, and so who knows if he'll ever reappear again. Number 7. The Jokers. In the Three Jokers story from 2020, 3 crimes were committed on the same night, seemingly all by the Joker. Thanks to Batman's time on the Mobius chair during Darkseid War, he knows that there are indeed 3 Jokers running around Gotham. The original Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, the Killing Joke Joker, known as the Clown, and the Silver Age Joker, known as the Comedian. Jason Todd, Barbara Gordon, and Batman himself all team up to go after each Joker one at a time. It doesn't nearly go that smoothly. This is one of the best Joker stories in recent years. It almost feels like it stands alone outside of any kind of continuity. It's incredibly good, and the revelation of 3 different Jokers was something a lot of people just never expected. But what I think is even better than 3 Jokers is the chaotic feeling of not knowing if there was actually 3 or if there is a definitive Joker until the end when you find out.
Coming in number 6, we've got Captain Marvel. Now here's an odd send-off for a superhero. Instead of being bested in battle or sacrificing oneself for the greater good, Mar-Vell was killed by something more folks might be able to relate to. It was cancer. The powerful and generous hero learned that he was ill and there wasn't much he could do about it. He learns that his past experiences exposed him to a highly volatile substance that gave him incurable cancer. From there, he does his best to be at peace with his dwindling lifespan and is visited by all sorts of people, both friend and foe, in one final send-off. The final figure that arrived was his longtime enemy and leader of the Skrulls, Thanos. He wasn't there to fight though, he was there to guide Mar-Vell to the afterlife. It says a lot about a character when even their most bitter rival shows up at the end to lend a hand. Coming in number 5, we've got Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy had such a huge impact on Peter Parker and therefore Spider-Man that it's impossible to look past this shocking death. The implications of that final neck snap reverberated all throughout the comic community. There has been plenty of controversy over Spider-Man's attempt to save Gwen and whether or not he contributed to her death by catching her awkwardly. Was it his fault that he couldn't save her? What does that mean for Peter moving forward? How much of the blame can be placed on the Green Goblin? All very good questions, a few of which caused more than minor uproar. It was later revealed that Gwen died of shock on her way to the ground, so there was nothing the web-slinger could do regardless. But her death forever altered the way Peter Parker looked at the world, and I'd say a lot of fans feel the same way. Coming in number 4, we've got Superman. Now this was probably the apex of impactful superhero deaths. Not necessarily because of the actual impact of his passing, but the craziness that it caused everywhere. Like when folks learned of Superman's death in 1992, sales went through the roof. Until that point, Superman was invincible. He could not be beat, let alone killed. Sure, he'd had brushes with failure in the past, and there were times that he could not complete the tasks he needed to complete, but dying? Superman? Damn, Doomsday, your name is really apt. Even the follow-up issue sold like hotcakes, almost matching the sales of the death of Superman. That's how you keep folks invested, apparently. Kill off your hero. Coming in number 3, we've got Elektra. A whole decade before Superman bit the dust, we had another controversial, dark, and upsetting death in comics. The Assassin in Red, martial arts master, and love interest of Matt Murdock, Elektra. After a brutal fight with Bullseye, Elektra is pierced through the chest and left to die. It was a wild move, especially for the time. Nobody expected this well-developed fan favorite to kick the bucket just like that, but that is exactly what happened. And it wasn't a half-assed death either. There was no coming back from it. When it happened, Elektra was dead and gone. Sure, she's made her way back into the rotation now in alternate universes and other comics, but in that run, she was gone. Coming in number 2, we've got Jason Todd. Oh boy. You could argue that people did see this one coming, as DC allowed fans to call in and vote for the outcome. It was up to the good folks at home to decide whether Robin would live or die, and in the end, they chose for him to die. That's brutal. After a drawn-out battle with the Joker, where poor Jason is beaten within an inch of his life, Batman almost pulls off the rescue. However, at the last moment, a bomb goes off and Robin tosses himself atop to stifle the explosion. There's no coming back from an injury like that. So thanks to the fans that voted for it, and some particularly fiendish storytelling, the Boy Wonder was no more. Ouch. And finally at number 1, we've got Barry Allen. Oh no. This is a tough one to stomach, that's for sure. After a lifetime's worth of genius brainpower and speed beyond measure, it seemed that the Flash would never truly meet his match. Nothing lasts forever though, and when an antimatter cannon was being prepped for annihilation, he had to step up, and fast. So that's what he did. Barry created a speed vortex powerful enough to destroy the weapon and prevent it from causing any harm, but in doing so exerted too much energy. The force that he generated tore his own body apart, ending his life. The worst bit is, folks got to see his face break down to nothing as it was happening. It's a wild and disturbing image for sure. So by putting it all on the line to save the world, Barry lost it all.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we have Kyle Rayner gets the cold shoulder. If a villain can't take down a hero, usually the first thing they go for are their loved ones. I mean, they usually are way weaker than the hero, and it's one of the only ways you can hurt them emotionally. And an emotionally unstable hero is easier to take down than someone who is clear-headed and focused. And Kyle Rayner would learn this the hard way. After flying around in space, saving the universe from all the strangest things in the galaxy, you think he would be ready to see it all. I mean, what on earth could be more shocking than meeting a race of aliens hell-bent on destroying the universe? Well, how about finding your girlfriend stuffed in a fridge? That's right, one of the greatest Green Lanterns would come home to find his girlfriend murdered and compacted right next to the condiments. That is definitely going to make it hard to love again. Coming in at number 9, we have Batgirl's Got Some Bad Manners. Swearing in comics is nothing new, but for a lot of the most popular DC characters, you will never see this pop up on the page because the comics need to be sold to a wide range of readers. Which is kind of strange because you can totally have people getting their heads smashed in until they're unconscious, but no curse words. Well, in one of the issues of All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder, Batgirl screams out, "Sell your poison someplace else, this arcade belongs to the effing Batgirl." Now this shouldn't have been a big deal, as the people at DC blacked out the lettering so you couldn't see what Batgirl was saying, but you could put the pieces together in your head. That's not the shocking part. The shocking part is that the blacking out of the lettering on many of the issues wasn't dark enough, and most of the readers could make out what she was saying. So this was a huge screw up for DC, and they had to recall a ton of the comics and put new versions on the shelves that had the swear words completely blacked out. Coming in at number 8, we have Starfire Gets Too Sexy. Now, it's no surprise for female characters to be over-sexualized in comic books, but for this particular example, it was so blatant that Starfire fans were up in arms about this. I first got introduced to Starfire in Teen Titans, and she seemed to be like a clueless alien girl who had some pretty intense powers. In the comics, she was a pretty interesting character, well, until they spruced her up for the New 52. And by spruced her up, I mean they gave her some massive boobs and basically made her the horniest character in the Justice League. The center point of the new character was all about sexy, and it seemed that she was walking around trying to hook up with every last attractive person with a pulse. Since then, the character has been reworked to embrace her sexual side with a little bit more taste by having her come from a homeworld where monogamy isn't a thing. That sounds like a great place. But when the character first changed, people were feeling a little fiery. Coming in at number 7, we have Wiener Tentacles. Staying in the realm of the New 52, we're going to talk about the Swamp Thing, one of the quietly most powerful characters in the DC universe. And every time I see one of the covers from this comic, I get the feeling that I'm looking at a poster from a 1950s monster movie, in a good way. And the cover of issue 11 was no different. You have Swamp Thing carrying his loved one through a barrage of tentacles that seem to be attacking her. The only problem is the tentacles looked a little bit like wieners. A lot of fans started commenting about how the tube-like appendages looked a lot like those things that dangle between a dude's thighs, and it didn't help that these tentacles were a peach color, so they very much looked like a skin tone. This was so much of a problem that the comics had to be recalled and the artwork reworked. This was one of the funniest mistakes I have ever heard of.
In at number 6, Nightwing and Catwoman. Now I get that this is a superhero hookup video, but Catwoman has done heroic things before, so let's just give her the benefit of the doubt. Back in 1996 for Nightwing issue number 52, Catwoman and Nightwing had a very unusual and unexpected encounter. The hookup between them didn't exactly come from a place of hidden affection either. Catwoman wanted to make Batman jealous, and when Grayson ran into her at a warehouse, she took full advantage of this opportunity. Nightwing is trying to switch the focus to the danger at hand, but Catwoman is only focused on this bizarre jealousy scheme. Regardless of the intentions on both ends, they both engaged in this secret love affair and then agreed not to let Bruce know. Like he wouldn't find out eventually. In at number 5, Daredevil and Black Cat. During the comic book Amazing Spider-Man number 677, Black Cat had been arrested, so Spider-Man had called on Daredevil for an epic team up to help free her, although Black Cat didn't really need either of their help. She was already able to break out of prison on her own and even set up a trap for the two. I mean, what a nice thing to do for somebody that wanted to free you from jail. Oh, and by the way, the trap? She rigged 2 buildings to crash down on top of them, leaving both superheroes quite helpless. And at the end, they were able to sort out their differences, but for whatever reason, Daredevil felt this attraction for Black Cat. The two eventually hooked up, but other than that single surprising time, they didn't develop the relationship into anything more. I mean, thank God. She's evil lady. In at number 4, Batman and Black Canary. Typically, the masterful fighter Black Canary is known for her relationship with Oliver Queen, although when it came to Frank Miller's Dark Knight and All-Star Batman and Robin, he shocked fans with a surprising hookup. The random hookup was brief and fleeting, but regardless was filled with an intense comic book hookup passion. Black Canary started to fall for Batman simply for his ability to fight off criminals using just his fists, which makes sense considering how notable of a fighter the Black Canary is. Although we're guessing this relationship didn't last long because the first thing Batman said when kissing her, "I haven't kissed a smoker in weeks, not since Selena." Way to kill the vibe, dude. Bringing up your ex on the first kiss? Man. In at number 3, Johnny Storm and Medusa. This hookup certainly shocked fans of the Uncanny Inhumans, especially considering that Johnny was already in an established relationship with Crystal, the element-controlling Inhuman royal family member. However, in 2016, during issue number 8 of the Inhuman series, Johnny had flipped the script and hooked up with Crystal's sister Medusa. This is like a comic book soap opera. At the time, she wasn't with Black Bolt anymore, and as fate would have it, the pair instantly clicked. Of course, it didn't last long when Crystal found out. Then when Black Bolt returned, things got even more awkward with Johnny deciding to just leave the Inhumans to avoid any friction altogether. Probably a good move. In at number 2, Captain America and Scarlet Witch. Yep, you heard that right. This hookup was certainly a bizarre moment considering the fact that these two for a long time were considered by fans as more of a mentor-mentee type relationship. Because of this, it came as a huge surprise that a romance was starting between them. Although Wanda had actually been crushing on Cap for a long time. In fact, ever since the beginning of her time with the Avengers, the two shared many close calls that built up to this passionate yet short-lived hookup. However, it only ended between them because Captain America didn't think it was a great idea. The feeling was not mutual. Wanda ended up using her reality warping powers to cause a reaction of events that culminated with the Avengers Disassembled storyline, which yet again reinforces the idea that you should never date your coworkers. Last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Doctor Strange and Elektra. Set to be released March 4th, 2020, the cover for the Savage Avengers issue number 11 has raised a lot of eyebrows. The comic book is meant to reveal the horrific secret behind Kulanga's power, but the real question most fans will have is this hookup between Elektra and Doctor Strange. It's just bizarre. We don't know all the details as of yet, but what we do know is that Clea and Matt Murdock are probably equally out of the loop on this one. In the previous issue, Strange, Doom, and Conan the Barbarian will attempt to kill Kulangath, but for the next issue to have this as the cover, something had to have gone down. I guess we'll have to wait and see though, if this is going to be either short-lived or long-term. Who's to say? Although I want to hear what you have to say about it. Leave me a comment down below if you think their relationship is going to go on. Is Matt Murdock going to come back and be like, bro, you stole my girlfriend, what's up?
Number 10, Vandal Savage. So this one comes to us from the alternate world belonging to Deceased. You might be thinking, but wait a minute Amanda, isn't it a given that these characters in Deceased will die? It's deceased after all, and this world is filled with anti-life equation zombies. And yes, it is a given. But just because we know they're going to die doesn't mean the way that their death comes about or the sheer terror of how it happens can't surprise and astound us. That is exactly the case for villain Vandal Savage, part of one of the groups we follow in the Deceased Unkillable series. It turns out Vandal himself was, well, not so unkillable when Wonder Woman catches the Ancient Immortal off guard, busting in and almost insta-killing him before he even has time to properly react by ripping him in half. The psh is the blood splatter. Number 9. Jason Todd. I'm ranking this one low because, I mean, we really all should have known to expect this death, and yet somehow we didn't. Jason's reception as a character was rocky, and it was because of this that DC contemplated killing his character off altogether. To decide, they put out a bulletin in their comics asking people to call in and vote as to whether or not Jason Todd would survive or die during the story arc Death in the Family. People voted, but not thinking their vote would actually matter. They never thought DC would actually just kill Jason Todd because of a fan poll, and yet that is exactly what they did. Jason died and fans were left flabbergasted despite the fact that some of them had actually sealed his fate. Number 8. Superman. Well, this might not seem as shocking now. When Death of Superman first came out, it was so unexpected it made real world headlines. News was out that Superman was dead, one of comics' most iconic heroes of all time. How did that happen? The new and unstoppable villain Doomsday appeared on the scene and Superman was forced to put a stop to him. Or try at least. Superman succeeded, but at the cost of his life, with both hero and villain appearing to die of their injuries in the comic. The pitch for this story evolved out of a joke regarding ideas for how to boost sales, which it actually ended up successfully doing. The comic Death of Superman sold like hotcakes and also helped to boost sales for Superman's return story in Reign of the Supermen. Number 7. Elongated Man. This is one of those deaths where it felt like Sue Dibney, Elongated Man's wife, had died and comic writers felt therefore he should die also? To, I guess, keep the married couple together? You get married together, you live together, you die together? Is that what you promise when you get married to someone? Sue died in Identity Crisis. Her murder was the mystery readers watched the heroes unravel and attempt to solve. Shortly after, Elongated Man Ralph Dibney attempted to resurrect her and then had to fight Felix Faust, who was disguised as Nabu, but who apparently Ralph knew was actually Faust the entire time. These two fight, the Elongated Man dies, and Faust becomes imprisoned. All that so Sue and Ralph really can be together and become ghost detectives. Nope, I'm not kidding. Number 6. Pariah. Pariah recently made a surprising comeback in the comics when he destroyed all of the Justice League, or well, like almost all of the Justice League. You've heard of the recent story Death of the Justice League. Well, yeah, that was Pariah. Although Pariah was once a scientist and fairly good man, he was driven mad when he learned that the multiverse was ending during the lead up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, way back in the day. He tried to warn people that it was coming, but people did not want to listen to him. Now, once more, he's in a similar position. In a desperate attempt to prevent another crisis from cyclically destroying everything, this time Dark Crisis, he decided to kill all the heroes, believing that in doing so he would basically prevent the cycle from continuing that would lead to the destruction of the multiverse. It's a pretty crazy idea, but at this point, Pariah is a pretty crazy guy. Although it makes sense that he would be part of the catalyst for another crisis, DC fans were still surprised to see him return once more in modern comics. I think we were also all surprised that there's going to be another crisis, considering the last one was called Final Crisis. Not so final, it turns out. Number 5. Inheritors. A whole group of villains that I think everyone was fairly surprised to see return again were the Inheritors. This is because the Inheritors were firmly defeated in the previous Spider-Verse event. However, because Spider-Verse was such a massive success, Marvel decided to let the Inheritors return for the next one, Spider-Geddon. And we still have another third chapter of this continuous event headed our way, said to be the end of the Spider-Verse trilogy that will be known as, aptly, the end of the Spider-Verse. At least until we decide to, open that Spider-Verse back up again, because, things end, things are final, and then not so much. I have no doubt that the Spider-Verse will come back eventually. The Inheritors are a group of space energy vampires permanently frozen in time when it comes to their style, stuck in sort of the Gothic Victorian era. I love it, but not everybody is here for it. They were defeated and killed at the end of Spider-Verse, but miraculously miraculously came back via Superior Spider-Man's tech when he decided to combine their DNA to basically make a clone body for himself should he perish. Using his tech, all the inheritors were able to return as clones themselves, causing all the spider totems across the multiverse to rejoin once more during Spider-Geddon to take them out again. And then they became little baby versions of themselves. Which I love. And also I feel like the baby inheritors should get their own book. I said it. Number 4. Flashpoint Joker. The Flashpoint version of Joker is actually Bruce Wayne's mother, Martha Wayne. In the Flashpoint continuity, young Bruce is the one who perished during the mugging as opposed to his parents. Suffering greatly from the loss of their young son, Thomas turned to the path of vengeance, whereas Martha became extremely depressed and ultimately lost her mind, turning to the path of chaos. In the Flashpoint reality and timeline, Thomas becomes Batman and Martha becomes his Joker. Recently in the comics, during Flashpoint Beyond, Flashpoint Joker has made a surprising return, appearing from within the walls of Arkham Asylum. How she got there? Well, we're gonna have to wait and see. What we do know is that she was the one behind the murders of influential characters from the Flashpoint universe. The last we saw of Flashpoint Joker, Martha died drowning in a river, sacrificing herself after learning that in the main continuity, the Joker was the main nemesis to Batman, who in that reality of course was Bruce Wayne, her son, who was alive in that reality. The Flashpoint continuity was reset though recently, with Thomas Wayne's Batman remembering everything that happened previously and trying to solve the mystery of how it all reset. And also solve the mystery of, why all these Flashpoint people were dying. Turned out, it was Martha in the walls of Arkham for some reason. We don't know why. Number 3. Cassandra Nova. Cassandra Nova recently made a comeback in the Marauders series, a surprising one too, when she was needed to help solve a mutant mystery revolving around the existence of the very first mutants, hidden from the Earth mutant history apparently, and then later was invited to join the Marauders team by team leader Captain Kate Pryde. A lot of mysteries needing to be solved, and a lot of surprising villain comebacks in relation to those mysteries. At first I wasn't just startled to see Cassandra Nova, I was downright confused, but I gotta say over the last few issues her return has grown on me, and I'm kind of here for it. I never would have expected to see Cassandra Nova return, definitely not in a heroic sense either, not with a hero team. Krakoa may be for all mutants, but some wouldn't even consider Cassandra to be a mutant, at least not in the traditional sense, because she's a Mumadrai. But whatever, she's a mutant, she's part of the crew now, I would say. Number 2. Gaggy. This was one that even caught me by a delightful surprise during the Three Jokers story. While I still am not sure if we know where this story falls in continuity, in or out of continuity, it's still a really awesome read that brought back a villainous sidekick of old that I didn't know how much I really missed until I saw him return. Gaggy is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, an old school sidekick of the Jokers from way back in the day, back in the 60s, before he was ever with Harley Quinn. In fact, at one point Gaggy also returned to get revenge on Harley for taking his place at Joker's side, but that happened I believe during Gotham City Sirens, another cool comeback moment for the gangster. In Three Jokers however, Gaggy returns as one of the Three Jokers sidekicks. However, his comeback is short-lived, as he ends up being devoured by a Joker shark. R.I.P. Gaggy. He came back and then he died. Number 1. Raquel. I don't know how we say this name. It's Skrull, so I don't speak Skrull. I'm sorry. Need to learn how to speak Krakoan and Skrull. Got it. Raquel was a really weird comeback, so unexpected that it left everyone who was reading Marvel Comics at the time going, who? Huh? What's happening? Who is that? Even I had to look her up myself. Raquel was Empress of the Skrull Empire, who was believed dead for years. When Galactus came to devour the main homeworld of the Skrull at the time, Tarnax 4, Raquel was believed to have perished with it. However, we later learned during the Empire event a few years ago that she had actually survived the death of this world and had been living undercover as the Kree soldier T'Nalth the Pursuer. Her return was a major surprise to readers because she had been dead since the 80s, so before I was even born. So I was like, who dis? I don't know. So unless you'd been reading comics for that long, or you really knew your Fantastic Four comic book history in terms of what went down back then, you were likely confused by her appearance too. Which is alright, because you know what? We got the internet, and we got piles of comics that we can sift through. Although I think all of us collectively, no matter if we were familiar or not with Raquel, were surprised by her return. Even if you did know who she was, you'd be like, wait, what? I thought she was dead.